Carmel Cipollone, 5 minutes.
Mr Speaker, this is the first time I've been able to stand in the House and speak in 2015, so can I start just by saying Happy New Year to you and Happy New Year to all of my parliamentary colleagues across the House. Mr Speaker, Labor initially supported this bill to Select Committee, and clearly we support the intent of the bill, which is, in our mind, caring for vulnerable workers. However, following submissions, it has become very apparent that it will not significantly tackle migrant exploitation, and that there are several issues with the bill that have been pointed out today by my Labor colleagues, by Green Party colleagues, and also by former colleagues who are no longer in the House, Mr Speaker. Changes to immigration law to increase penalties for employers who exploit migrant workers will be ineffective without a significant boost to enforcement resources, Mr Speaker, and that's the number one concern, is that we can legislate, but if the resourcing's not in place in terms of the labour inspectors, then who will be monitoring what is going on? And as the Green MP before me said, that there are currently only approximately 40 labour inspectors operating across the country, and Mr Speaker, that will do little to assist us with looking after, monitoring our vulnerable workers, including our new migrant workers. Mr Speaker, we all know in this House, we're all very aware of this from all sides of the House, that migrant worker exploitation is growing in New Zealand. We've seen it highlighted by reports in recent years of Christchurch workers not being paid for holidays and annual leave and not on employment agreements, Mr Speaker. We know that the law will still depend on migrant workers coming forward, and as many of my parliamentary colleagues have said today, that is a highly risky proposition for a worker new to New Zealand whose visa status often depends on their job. Mr Speaker, there are often other barriers such as English barriers which hinder their ability to come forward, and of course there's that imbalanced power relationship between that employee and the employer that could influence whether or not they come forward with any of their concerns. Mr Speaker, even with added protections, it is particularly difficult for migrant workers to put their jobs on the line and hope they will be able to find other work. Mr Speaker, I'm really concerned about the extended powers of search by the Immigration Department, not the Department of Labour, but the Immigration Department. And as one of my parliamentary colleagues said earlier, we can't help but harken back to the Dawn raids in the 70s and be reminded of that, the fear that was struck into new migrants, many of them Pacific Islanders at the time. And we know, Mr Speaker, that that same fear could be inflicted on new migrant groups now if they have immigration inspectors entering their private residence to undertake extended searches, Mr Speaker. So if we're talking here about protecting the migrant worker, then I fail to understand how intimidating them, how going into their private residence and provoking fear amongst them is going to in any way assist us with protecting them in the workplace, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, far too many migrant workers in New Zealand have their employment rights abused, which not only harms our migrant communities but also undermines the wages and conditions of all workers in New Zealand. When considering the Immigration Amendment Bill number 2, it is important to remember national shameful scaremongering about boat people in the first Immigration Amendment Bill. I'm not sure if anyone's brought that up, but I think it is worth reminding us all in the House of that. It's good to see the government in this bill putting some thought to assisting migrant workers. However, the changes proposed still fail to address the core issues. Mr Speaker, we need to create an environment to enable workers to report abuse. Workers are not going to report exploitation if they risk being deported. The failure to provide visa protection for those on temporary visas undermines the entire intent of the bill. The government also continues to fail to employ enough labour inspectors, as I said earlier, to reduce the pressure on migrant workers to report. That is probably one of the major failings with the bill that we have in front of us, Mr Speaker. The absolute discretion clause to make decisions without giving reasons and if liable to abuse, particular with clause 8, which makes clear that the Privacy Act does not apply to reasons for decisions made using absolute discretion, is concerning, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, I'm going to wind up by just saying we did support the intent of this bill, but we cannot support what we have in front of us right now.
I call the